Good morning and welcome to the CALLERLAB convention in Norfolk. This is Tools of the Trade. I hope you're in the right room. We're going to talk a little bit about sound. I'm your moderator, Scott Bennett. There's one in every crowd. And your panelists today will be Matt Worley. Matt's very knowledgeable about sound. He's actually providing sound for the convention here. And I thought that I'd just start for a minute talking about sound. Of all the tools that we have, this is the one that's most key. If you don't have proper sound, they can't hear what you're doing. You could have the greatest voice on the planet, but if your sound's not right, they'll never know it. If you got great music, everything's wonderful, it's jumping, it's carrying on, but if they can't feel it, they can't hear it, they can't dance it. All these things have to happen. I mean, everything centers around that. And there's different types of sound, different issues that you run into with sound, different characteristics of buildings and big venues, acoustically challenged halls that you may have to do something unusual to do. I think Matt's going to talk to you a whole lot about these things. So I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt, and then we might fill in some blanks along the way. I'd appreciate it if you kind of hold your questions to the end. We'll give you an opportunity to ask questions or make comments, that sort of thing. Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Worley.
Good morning. Well, first of all, I think most of us know what inputs and outputs are on our amplifiers. Of course, your input is what goes into your amp. For example, your music or your microphone, and output, of course, output actually comes what's coming out of your amp into your speaker. And what I like to do is I prefer to have my main speaker in the center of the hall. If necessary, you can also use multiple speakers depending on the size of your hall. And I like to have my speaker kind of just a little bit behind me, so in that way I can hear my voice and I can also hear the music. Very important to be able to hear both, because if it's too out far in front and you're performing, you can't hear how loud you are or how loud your music is. You might be blasting the people out. So you definitely don't want to do that. Also, tone controls for your music. Now, each piece of music is recorded just a little bit different, and you might need to boost the bass a little bit. You might need to cut some of the bass out. You might need to add a little treble, or you might need to take some of the treble out, because each song is different. Same thing with your voice. You might need to put a little bit more bass in your voice or take some out. Because if your voice is too bassy, here I am. If your voice is too bassy, you kind of sound a little bit muddy. And if you've got a little bit too much, whoops, let me do it this way. I'm doing the wrong knob. There you go. There's the bass. There's the bass. And here's your treble. Can you hear that? That sounds really nice, doesn't it? Hey, how would you like for me to talk the rest of the day like this? I don't think I could take that. I don't either. All right, so I like my voice a little bit warmer than that. But I don't like it muddy either. That's a little bit muddy. Can you all hear the difference in between? All right, so let me put that back. That sounds better. Okay. I sound like me now. All right. Now, hall size. You've got all sorts of different types of rooms that you might be working in. It could be a square room, maybe a round room. How about a gymnasium? Or maybe you've got posts or pillars all throughout your hall, or maybe just a few. So you have to look out also for if you're going to be working on a stage. Are you working on the floor? Are the ceilings really high, where that can really be an issue with echo? Of course, that's a repeating sound. Padded walls, that's nice because that absorbs sound. Painted walls, that's going to bounce off or reflect. And then you've got fake walls, like we have these room dividers downstairs, and sometimes those work well, sometimes they don't. If you've got like absorbing sound baffles in the ceiling. That can really be nice to work with. Now, any time you're working and you've got like the downstairs, we have the York Hall and the Stratford Hall. I don't know if you've all have noticed, but there's a door that you can go in and out of. Right by that door is a nice hole. Anywhere air can go, sound can go. So a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to put parachutes, hang them from the ceiling. That's going to really absorb some sound. It goes right through it. Have you ever been to a convention, state convention, national convention? They have pipe and drape to separate the halls. Doesn't do anything for sound absorption at all. It just goes right through it. See, we already covered that. Now, vocally, here's another thing that depends on where your microphone is, too. Now, we all have different types of microphones. I thought I had the flat one in here. Yeah, there's a 967. It's Electro Voice. It's got a flat top to it. That microphone is a great microphone, but a lot of callers will call and they'll just talk across the top of it, and you really can't hear them really well. But if you just roll that microphone up, ooh, there's a big difference there. Can you tell a difference in sound? Everybody's shaking their head for the people on the recorder there. Yes, you can hear the difference. Yes, okay. Yeah. Also, you don't want your microphone right on your lips. Don't kiss your microphone. You can tell if you kiss your microphone if you examine it and it looks terrible. Spit, lipstick for the ladies. Yeah. So you don't necessarily want it right on your lips. You kind of want it a little bit, far from your lips. I'd say about an inch is good. And my particular mic, well, 2 for you. Okay, that's good. 2 fingers is good. Yeah. But some microphones, like the one I've got, I can actually have it anywhere I want, and it sounds great. Some microphones, you have to definitely talk right into them, or you won't have that nice sound to them.
Unidirectional.
There we go. That's the word I was looking for.
They have to be right on the instrument. If it's omnidirectional, then it doesn't care.
Yes. Also, let's see. Our speakers, now we're using yak stacks. There are different types of speakers, and I do have handouts in the back for multiple hookups for yak stacks if you want to hook up more than one. And then there's the other 2 if you want to take 2 yaks, use 1 full one and split it in half. Those are also available in the back. Let me see. Well, like I was saying, there are lots of really good speakers out there, not just yak stacks. But yak stacks are really good for vocals because they're right in the middle, and they put your voice right out in front. Now, as far as your music goes, it's kind of limited because it's more of a mid-range speaker. It's not really good for really highs or really, really low lows. Now, your speakers that you can get like at Guitar Center or other places like that, you can use those as well, but you have to be careful with the bass because sometimes too much bass is not good for some dancers. It kind of gets on their nerves a little bit, or too much treble because that can be really irritating. Listening all night long, give you a headache in a hurry. Let me see. Now, if you're going to use a powered speaker, I would suggest that you have some sort of an amp mixer. That way you can control the tones of your voice, and you can also control the tones of your music. Because I think that's really important, because some of them have adjustments on the speakers themselves, and you don't want to necessarily have to be reaching up and grabbing those all the time. Because again, all songs are different. So if you start a song and, oh my God, there's too much bass, you got to run over and turn it down, or you can just do it on your mixer. Um, let's see. Do you have, you were going to mention something about. Oh, I didn't. Oh, I didn't. Don't have any music to set up. I can set up something in a. Okay. Go ahead and say that, and I'll go ahead and I'll put some music in.
Well, if I can get this projector to work here, I got something for you that kind of give you a quick little discussion about resistance and speaker hookup and that sort of thing. Excuse me. If I can get the thing to work. I can see it's on. I'm just waiting for it to. I think it's loading. It's just warming up. Okay, good. We may have to do some work on that. May have to just kick up this thing. It's kind of small, you know. That's probably going to be the best I can get it. Okay. Your speakers are rated in a particular way. Your amplifier is rated in a particular way. It has requirements. Care and feeding, if you want to call it that. It has things that you have to watch for. Let me get back over here so I can run my pictures here. So when you're dealing with an amplifier, I put in here a couple of notes. They're rated in how many watts of power that they can handle on its output. How much work can it do? Ohms, they're a lot of times rated in ohms for the minimum ohms that you have to have. You don't want to drop below this resistance level. If you drop below that, then it's going to cause the current, the amps, to go up higher than what it's designed to do, which increases the watt requirement, causes the amp to overload and shut down. They might be rated some way like this, in my example, 200 watts at 4 ohms. That might be one way that they'll represent that. Speakers are rated similarly. If you're talking about the number of watts a speaker can handle, you're talking about how much power you can apply. First time it was the output of power. Now we're talking about the power that it can take in. Okay, so the speaker can take in so many watts of power before you overload the speaker and blow out the cone. They're rated in ohms as well. Example might be, they might say nominal impedance of 4 ohms at a maximum of 200 watts, or it might have a continuous, sometimes they call that RMS, as so many watts of power that it can withstand. So going on with that, there's a couple of speaker hookup things that I wanted to cover with you. Every time you add something in parallel, and I'll get parallels kind of like two separate paths that you can run, multiple paths that you can run. Each speaker has its full shot at the amplifier, if you want to look at it that way. Trying to keep it simple terms. When you put that in like that, every time you add another speaker in parallel, the total circuit resistance goes down. If the total circuit resistance goes down, what happens to my current level? It goes up. And when that amperage level gets higher and higher, the watt level requirement gets higher and higher, you overload the amp, and the amp shuts down. Starting to make sense a little bit? So when you put it in parallel, what I'm saying here is you're decreasing the resistance, increasing the current, you're decreasing the amount of load on the circuit, and increasing the amount of work that the circuit's going to have to do, is going to do. So then in series, when you look at series, I'm increasing the resistance. It's an additive thing. It's like I'm pushing one speaker through the other speaker to get to the amplifier. So every time I add a speaker in series, I'm increasing the resistance. It's additive. The parallel thing is actually a pretty complicated math thing that you would have to do. I can show you a simple way to do it as long as you don't mix speakers, where you can take the number of speakers and the actual ohms, rated ohms, and do a calculation. I'll show you that in a minute. But in series, it's an additive thing. Everything's additive. Whatever you put in series, in line, that's another term for series, is additive. It just increases the resistance. You're adding more load, and therefore the current actually goes down. Higher resistance, lower current. Think of them like on teeter-totter, current and resistance, right? So now I get that down, and I get the watts to be okay, and the amplifier doesn't get too hot, and it doesn't shut off, and all's right with the world. Then we got some combination circuits, kind of like the ones that you're looking at there that Matt gave you the handouts for. You got some complicated arrangements where you may have to make a series to parallel, parallel to series, and so on. Well, I quickly added some little pictures here. You've seen these adapters before. Does anybody know if that's parallel or series? That's parallel. So if you use that in your speaker circuit, you're creating a parallel. So every time you add a speaker with one of these guys, you've lowered the total resistance. Every time you add one of those, the total resistance gets lower.
Some of us use those as microphone splitters, and we all know that both microphones have to be on. If
Correct.
somebody turns theirs off, they're both off.
Yeah. He's not wrong. And then when we look at this adapter, you probably recognize one like this. So you probably use something like that if you have a yak stack or even I think the Linrons use something like that. It's just an adapter, Y adapter that plugs into the back of the set. Is that series or parallel? Parallel. So we're still parallel. Anytime I add one of these guys into the system, I'm lowering the total resistance. If I hook another speaker to one of those guys. Am I making sense a little bit? Okay. And by the way, I'm not a big fan of using that exact product in a speaker. That's actually designed for input. It's just barely any wire in there. They're designed for inputs, not really for outputs. And if you notice, you probably replace that like every couple of years. You just can't handle the current. Anybody know what this guy is? That's a series Y, and we have that series Y for that exact reason, because everything else we got out there is pretty well parallel. Would you agree? That the only place you're going to run out and find a series Y is right here pretty well. And you need to keep one of those. I would say keep one handy, close to my amplifier. If you're running an unknown, have one of those handy so you can plug it in. Anytime you add something to that, you're going to add whatever you put into, let's see, that guy gets added to whatever that guy is for your total resistance. Does that make sense at all? A little bit? And then here's some of my recommendations. I was trying to finish a couple of little items I wanted to put in here, and I just didn't get it done. I'm very sorry. I tell you, never mix different types of speakers to the same output. If you've got yak stacks and you've got Hiltons or whatever, if you're plugging it into the same outlet, for example, the back of this amp, that's the same channel. That's just a parallel splitter, really, is all that is. Same thing as one of those first guys I showed you. I don't do that. Now, some people do it and they get away with it. But you've got calculations you really should perform before you do that. You really should. And anyway, I guess what I'm getting at is don't do that if you can help it. You'll be happier. And if you want to do all the math, you're welcome to do that. I told you that I'd give you a kind of simple methodology. I wanted to have it up here so I could show it to you. But if you take the number of ohms that the speakers are rated at and write that down as the top of a fraction, and divide by the number of speakers you're going to hook up. And that would be your total parallel resistance if you're not mixing speakers. If you're not mixing speakers. So if you had 2 4-ohm speakers in parallel, how much would that be? 2 ohms. If the amp is rated at 4 ohms, can you run that? No. How should you have hooked it up? Through a series adapter. Matt?
Okay, I just wanted to say after you get everything all hooked up, you want to do a sound check. You want to make sure that you've got music and that you got voice. Very important. Just one moment. Let me plug this in. And when you plug in your music into your amp, you want to make sure all your volume is off. Because if you don't, you might hear a loud pop, you might hear a nice buzz. And when you start to play your music, have it completely off. And then slowly bring it up. And then listen to it. And again, every song is recorded a little bit. Let me turn this up just a tad. Okay. Every song's recorded different, so you go, well, maybe I want a little bit more bass. Maybe I'll treble, play with it, see where you're at. Okay, that's not too bad. Same thing with your voice here. You want to start with it off and then slowly bring it up. It was off and slowly bring it up. And again, adjust like we did earlier. See if you need some bass. No, that's way too much bass. Okay, maybe I need some treble. Oh, that's not too much there. Okay, so adjust that. Reasons why you don't want to do start off with your music too loud. It scares people, can scare you. So slowly bring your music up. Now, once you've had it set, then you're good to go. And you know exactly where, when you start, where you're gonna be. So when you start your singing call, which disappeared. I'm using a tablet, so I shouldn't have used that. Well, let's just go ahead and do this again. So you know exactly where you are. In case anyone is wondering, this is called Down and Dirty. It's a patter on ESP. It's a real good patter record. And if you have the remote option is always nice, so you can turn your music up and down. And also, if you have like a round dance cure that's working with you, they'll probably mess with your tone controls. So before you get started, again, you want to look and see where they are. Sometimes if someone else was on your microphone channel or your microphone, I don't like people using my microphone. I'm kind of picky about that. See where they adjusted the tone controls, and you can readjust it when you are performing. All right. Does anyone have any questions?
Be happy to bring the mic around. If you do have a question, state your name and where you're from before you ask your question. Sorry about that. It's a great place for that speaker, or a great place for me. I think he was first.
Virgil Forbes out of Maryland. Had a case last summer. Actually, it blew my Hilton, but that's okay. Even when you're using all yaks, there is a major difference between the yaks produced 20 years ago and the ones produced 2 or 3 years ago. It does not hurt if you're sounding a major hall. ohmmeters are really great, or multimeters, to double check the resistance that you're actually seeing coming off the speaker wires.
That's a great point, Virgil. Who is next? Right here.
Ed McAtee from Washington, D.C. area. So the feedback reminded me to ask about when we're on a wireless mic and how to avoid having feedback, or is it avoidable if we're dancing in the square, out on the floor in front of the speakers? Is that a function of how loud the little transmitter thing is on the table, or the loudness of the amp, our Hilton thing, or what?
Combination, I would say. Your gain on your transmitter, if it's really high, that can cause feedback, because you're going from a powered source into another powered source, and so if the gain is really hot, you don't need a whole lot of volume, and if you have a lot of volume, you're going to get your feedback. It could also be your tone control. If you've got too much treble, that can also cause it to feedback as well. If you have a cheap cordless microphone, that can also be an issue too. There are some microphones that one of the round out skewers that I work with has a Sennheiser cordless mic, and he can actually stand right on top of the speaker and it won't do anything. It's perfect. Of course, now he paid like $700 for this microphone. Some of us have money.
So when you say the gain, is that the volume control on the little transmitter?
Yes. Mm-hmm. There should be a separate gain on there that you can adjust.
Okay.
Yeah, you never want it on 10. That's never a good idea. I would start right in the middle, and work your way either left or right to see, and then also adjust on your sound system here on your amp.
Please translation to me. I came from Japan. Sorry, I cannot speak English. Little. I have a question. I live in Chiba Prefecture near Tokyo. Chiba about 70 clubs. Sometimes we open the anniversary or jamboree. In that case, we have a Bluetooth interface speaker. Bluetooth. Do you know? Okay. Of course. In Japan, sound maker released a lot of product released. I want to Bluetooth interface. I want to use Bluetooth interface. If you have information, please support to me regarding Bluetooth interface.
Bluetooth is coming a long way, but to this point, for what we do, it's still a little glitchy. I've experimented with inputs as well as outputs with Bluetooth, and I find them to be a little glitchy. We're not quite ready for it yet. You'll be calling along, and your music will have like a little hiccup in it. And it's like the signal transmission gets lost for a split second and comes back. Bluetooth is a technology that interfaces with computers and other mobile devices and that sort of thing for communication, where you can send sound signals through Bluetooth. And that was what he was asking about. Right. Cell phone or something along those lines. Bob, you had a comment?
Well, a lot of the times you're talking about the gain on your set. That's not the volume control on your set. There's also a gain. There's a separate little where you use your little screwdriver sometimes on there where you have to set that and then go and play with your volume control on your set. You always on some sets, yeah, like you said, on some sets. No, on your wireless. There's a little, and it's usually in the back, and there's a little set there. You just with your little screwdriver, and 9 times out of 10, most of the sets come with them little screwdrivers, and you have to set them things, and then you got to go back and play with it and make sure everything's good.
Remind them who you are.
Thank you, Ed, again from Washington. So you should be able to travel in front of a speaker with a wireless mic with no trouble, right? Because I always, or people are shaking their heads and maybe not, because I always make my square, whatever, when I'm out on the floor dancing with them, I say to my partner, you know, whatever square Scotty is in, I have to be over there away from the speaker, even though it's not where the numbered square might be normally. So I should be able to traverse in front of the speaker without any trouble? Not necessarily. Okay.
To answer that to the best that I can, anytime the signal that you're putting out comes back into the input, no matter what devices it's going through, it's going to reamplify itself. And that's what feedback is. It's the reamplifying of its same signal over and over and over to the point of oblivion, and it just gets to this high-pitched squeal because it's just out of control. It's amplifying everything that it takes in. Ask your question.
Jay Haynes, Pennsylvania. It matters whether your headset or handheld mic is omnidirectional or unidirectional. A lot of them are omnidirectional, which means they can pick up the sound coming in from any direction, whether you're facing sideways to the speaker or behind you, it could still pick it up. If you have a unidirectional mic, it's designed to pick up just what's coming into the mic, and they even have headsets that are unidirectional, but they might be more expensive. But that's the biggest difference, I think, that you need to consider.
And you're talking about the wireless mic being unidirectional, and right, available in that way. And how would I tell that if the documentation for this is long gone? It's what? I'm sorry? Yeah, but that box is long gone.
Google.
There'll be a model number. You can look it
Google.
up. Google. You had a comment.
Bo Byerly from North Carolina. This microphone is naked. It does not have the little foamy thing on top. That's called a windsock. And if you use, do you use a headset for your wireless? Yes, and I have a windsock. Oh, and you got a windsock on it. That'll help a lot too. But now, when you have the headsets, you've got the little battery pack that you have to clip on your belt.
Well, it's a wireless thing that sits on the table.
Oh.
It's a wireless headset.
Okay. Is there a volume control on the headset?
There is not.
Okay. Because sometimes you've got a volume control on the remote. Even some wireless microphones might have something like that. And some wireless microphones will have an adjustment for the pattern to make it more omnidirectional or unidirectional. So you've got to watch, and this is the problem with the Bluetooth. There's too many variables for the final signal to get to the speaker because you've got too many volume changes. You've got to broadcast from here to the receiver over there, which is connected to the amplifier by a wire, and then from the amplifier by another wire that goes to the speaker. So once you kind of stretch out your supply line, you're going to have more variables come into play, and you got to be very conscious of that. Test it out, and maybe you can get a little closer to the speakers if you've got a good windsock. Maybe you need a thicker one, or something like that.
Did you have a comment as well? Okay. I don't mean to kick you guys, but when your feet are
Well, I'm Terry Headley from West Virginia, and okay, so I have a building on my property where I have a Samson sound system set up, and then I also have the same system that I take to a local church down the block where I teach classes. So the problem I'm having is that when I'm having dances or whatever at the building, I don't get this popping noise out of the speaker. When I'm at the church, every so often it'll just be like a popping noise. It's not really feedback. It's like a popping noise. I'm using a wireless headset when I teach, when I call patterns into squares. It's not like that annoying feedback sound. It's like a pop. So what causes that? I bought it down in Winchester, Virginia, and I at this Shenandoah Music, and I was asking them, and they didn't really know either what was causing that. It doesn't happen at my place. It's the same system set up the same way. It only does it when I'm at the church, but not when I'm at my house. I mean, could there be interference from like a I don't.
Anything that causes a radio frequency.
I'll let you have a moment on the microphone. This will maybe clear that up a little bit. I worked in a club one time where the round dance cure used a wireless. And I'd be calling along, and next thing I knew, I heard CB radios coming in out over the speaker. I heard somebody's telephone conversation. It was coming in through their wireless. It was just get on the right interrupting frequency. You know, there may be something in the one building that's causing electrical interference with your wireless, and in the other building it's not.
But it's not a conversation. It's just like a pop. Right. But that can happen as well. Oh, well, okay.
It could be nearly anything. Bo, did you have another comment to that?
No, I was just going to say it could be the heating system coming on.
Something else coming on in the building that could cause it.
Yeah. Because it does come on. And then
Okay.
Anyone else got a question or comment?
do you have a way to get to another channel?
Yeah, I have like 8 different channels.
We're kind of getting this crosstalk thing happening.
Try a separate channel. That might help. Or a power conditioner, maybe. It's you just plug it into the outlet. You plug your equipment into it, and it keeps a continual current to your system. And if there's a fluctuation, it won't cause that. Sometimes that could be it.
Okay. Mike McIntyre from Winchester, Virginia. I have got a director which is blown as speaker, bass speaker, so I have in the past used Ashton, and the Ashton speaker is a 16 amp speaker instead of a 4 like the Hilton. 4 ohms, okay, and 16 ohms instead. And I don't have a problem with plugging that speaker in with the Hilton, but I have on 2 occasions when I've had both speakers running. And one, you said that's parallel coming out of the Hilton, so I was running one cable to one, another cable to the other one. If I were to split that, would I have a better luck from not blowing the Hilton?
You actually would still be paralleling the 2 speaker outputs. These guys are in parallel. So you'd put one in here with 16 ohms, and you'd have one here at 4 ohms. Your total resistance would be something less than 4 ohms. The total resistance in a parallel circuit is always lower than the lowest individual resistance. So it'd be something lower than 4 ohms, so you'd still be in trouble because you'd be below 4 ohms. It might be 3.2 or 2.9 or something, but it would be less than 4 ohms. I wouldn't mix the 2.
Yeah, don't.
That would be my
speakers.
suggestion. I think Barry was next.
A little bit different topic. Some callers are convinced that putting a series connection into connecting speakers with a series Y connector distorts the sound, causes it to be muddy. Has that been your experience?
I haven't experienced that myself.
Jim Duncan from North Carolina. If you have a single speaker cord coming out and you use a connector for 2 yaks, my MA220 cuts off. Won't handle it. I had to buy a 220 because I couldn't find a 150. Nobody would sell me one. But that is a danger with that. So
It's a very different issue if you're talking about two yaks in parallel on a
no, I'm only talking about one yak stack. Two half yaks plugged in with a connector, and one wire coming out of there. And on the 220, it won't, Jerry. You know it won't. Okay. Okay.
This is my personal opinion. When you put speakers in series, you're driving one speaker set of cones through another speaker set of cones and so on to get to the amplifier. Does it affect anything? Sure. Is it going to have the same amount of volume? No. You're going to have to turn the volume up. Some people would say that it distorts only the music channel, but doesn't affect the voice channel. Well, that's ridiculous. It has to affect them evenly. Now, there may be some frequency issue where certain frequencies are more affected than others, but they're affected evenly across the spectrum as far as plugging in a series. I haven't seen a big problem with it. You do have to turn up the volume more. Matt, have you had experience?
Exactly what you said. Sometimes you have to, it doesn't sound as loud, so you do have to pump up the volume just a little bit. But I haven't noticed a difference really in the sound quality other than the volume.
Right. So the quickest answer before I give Greg the mic, the big thing here, a lot of people don't necessarily understand that the MA150 had a different chip in it than what the 220 has. The amplifier chip is different. They don't make mono equipment anymore. That's just not something you can run out and buy. So they had to use a chip that was available. The chip that was available has a circuit protection chip in it. It says if the resistance gets below a certain level, the current's getting too high, it's going to cut the amp off to save the amp's life, to keep from blowing it up. The 150 didn't have that circuit in it. And it could handle it. It'd get warm. Admit it. It got warm. But it never cut off unless you were really driving it hard. On the 150. On a 150, if you really cranked it with two yaks in parallel plugged into that, two full yaks plugged into the back, if you weren't cranking it too hard, it'd live.
Wow.
Most of the time they'd live. If you turn it up, they might not live. But that completely blew up. It had to be repaired. The 220s, they don't blow up. They shut off to protect themselves by design.
Mine got so hot. My 150 got so hot with two yaks it cut off. I put another 150 down there with two yaks. It cut off.
I'm going to give this to Jerry.
Could you repeat?
Jerry Biggerstaff,
Could you
North Carolina.
Repeat what you said. For
We
the
were
tape,
at
please.
we were at a building, 75 squares. I had 150 with two yak stacks into it, no Y series. It got so hot it cut off. I put another 150 down there. It got so hot it cut off. Then I hooked up. I went back to the first one that had cooled down and come back on. I put a Y series connector on it. It played fine, but when Story got on to call, it distorted. The music and voice was distorted.
But both were distorted.
Both were distorted, yes.
Anyone else have any comment or question?
Jay Haynes. So were they full yaks or half yaks? Full yaks with the normal Y series connection? Parallel connection, I'm sorry. So it's 8.5 ohms each half through a parallel, parallel. That gives you, 4 ohms each. You plug one of those into each of the two channels of your MA150, and you've got 2 ohms. Two 4 ohms. You're way below what you safely level.
And the comment has already been made about watching between older yaks and newer yaks. Even if you talk about the midline yaks, the old ones were 9.6 ohms per half. The old ones were. And then there was a mid-range time where they were around 10 something. And Paul Cody told me last night that the new ones, the most recent yaks, are about 11.5 ohms per half. So what if you mix yaks? You know, that's all new calculations. But you absolutely do. That's what that's for, assuming that all the speakers are the same. Assuming they're the same. Yeah, not new to the old. They need to all be old or all mid-range or all new, but not new and an old. He needed the series adapter, but he's saying it distorted. But it distorted both the music and the voice, you say. All right. And that's the only way to get around the 2 ohm problem. Okay, so comment?
For the my name is Bob Ast from Illinois. On the jack stack speakers, the age of the speaker, you can tell if the connection is in the middle of the speaker itself, where it's on the box itself. You can tell that's one of the older yaks. The ones to the offset to the right hand side of the yak are the newer style, and a lot of them have, some of the older ones have Cinch Jones where there are 2 spades coming to, those are old, but they're still the same as they would come back out with a 1/4 inch and that stuff. Right, with one in the center. So you want to take a look at that when purchasing something and that stuff. So,
very good tip, Bob.
Jack Platty, Cincinnati. With this in mind, does anybody know if the replacement speakers that Hilton's selling is new or old?
they're new. They can't get the old.
The really old ones, he may have some new old stock. You'd have to ask him about that. He may have a little bit. Well, new parts, but the old style. You know, new parts but old style. You'd have to ask him. But he does have the mid-range ones, the ones that were produced, you know, during Tom Dillender's time, you know, when he was doing them. And I think he's currently looking for some new speakers to replace into the yaks, to upgrade the yaks to make them a little different for the future. But they're hard to find, the old style. One other thing I wanted to throw out there about the yak stacks, some of the early yak stacks were wired backwards intentionally compared to the new yak stacks. Well, as an example, if you had a positive connection and a negative connection. On yak A, let's say here's the positive and here's the negative. On yak B, here's the negative, here's the positive for the tape I'm motioning. But they're just flip-flopped. Well, that puts them out of phase with one another. So you have a left speaker that's blowing the cone out this way and a right speaker that's sucking the cone in this way. It sounds extremely strange. Yeah. And in fact, I was calling a dance one time, a huge festival. They had a column over here and a column over here. If I stood exactly in the middle, I had nothing. This wave canceled this wave. And talk about really interesting. It is. But I keep in my bag a phase changer. And all that is just an adapter that I made that has a 1/4 inch female and a male on the other end that just flip-flops. And I just keep that in my bag. So if one of those are out, I can put it back in.
I ended up slaving 2 150s, putting one yak on one 150, one yak on the other 150.
That's a great way to do it. That's a great solution if you're concerned about it. Or if you have another amplifier, a 500, let's say, you could put a whole yak on one channel and a whole yak on the monitor channel. 2 separate amplifiers. 2 separate amplifiers. How we doing on time there, Matt?
52?
About 15 minutes, okay. Any other questions or comments? I'm more than happy to run around. Here you go.
Susan Snyder from Jacksonville, Florida. I had tried to purchase some Linron speakers about a month after they quit making them, and I had heard that someone was going to take over and start making them. Is anybody aware of that happening?
I can tell you Skip Cleland is repairing some of them. I don't know if he's actually building any of them. And he may be building them, I just don't know about it. But he'd be somebody I'd contact. He can certainly repair them. I think he has parts, and I think if you send him a Linron, he'll repair it and send it back to you. Yes, ma'am.
Ed from Washington again. Do you all have any opinion on if there's any difference between music being played out of a tablet or a iPod or your computer or anything different venues of where the music comes from to begin with, assuming digital and not just records on a turntable?
I've got lots of opinions on that. Matt, I'll let you start.
Well, now, is this digital music that you're getting from Amazon, iTunes type, or is this something that has been converted from a record? There's a big difference.
Yeah, okay, so both. I mean, all of my music started out originally, not all of it recently, but when I went digital, it was converted from a record.
Okay.
Now it's purchased from iTunes or Amazon, something like that, so it already comes to me digitally. So yeah. I was more aiming that question at the physical thing that you play the music out of. Does that matter or not?
Well, see, now, what I would say is it depends on your recording. If you start playing your recording and it sounds like bacon's frying in the background, you might want to see if you can get the digital version of it. I know for some rounds that's probably impossible to do. Or find someone that maybe can clean it up for you. Because a lot of times it could be just that. But it shouldn't matter if you're playing it on your phone or if you're playing it on a tablet. It shouldn't make a difference. From what's happened with me, again, just adjust your bass and treble could be what you need to do.
I've had some experience working with inputs, and I find that most laptops, most cell phones and tablets, they're geared really for headphones, especially geared for earbuds. And they have to give you a little added bass that you don't necessarily need going into your input. They're doing that because you're plugging something into your ear that's very tiny. So if it amps up the bass a little bit, then it makes it sound better in your ear, but it's not the best for your input. It's not hurting the input, it's just going to be a little muddier. That's my opinion. You can to some degree. To some degree. Okay, I think he was first.
Virgil Forbes from Maryland. There is a great deal of difference in the sound cards from a quality laptop and the output, the sound from a smaller unit. Sometimes you can't tell, especially if you're using earbuds to monitor. The only real way to do it is plug it up in a full-size hall with the speakers you're going to use. Now, granted, Hilton and Jack are not what I would call great equipment for great music. They aren't built that way. They're built essentially for the rhythm track and the male baritone voice. That's where their sweet spots are. So if you're using especially anything downloaded from the various app stores, you need to actually plug it into the hardware you're going to use and the hall you're going to use it in and see what it sounds like and make notes to your adjustments at that point.
That's a great tip, Virgil. Jerry, you had a comment? Oh, let me get Tom first.
Do you take your music out of the headphone jack or do you use a USB port?
I personally use a USB port. And the reason for that is because I can get it to an external sound card. And the reason that I do that is because the particular one I have will allow me to get what they call a line out. And that's just a clean signal. It's not been conditioned. It's just straight off of the thing. It's straight off of the little amplifier in there instead of being conditioned to go out the headphones. An external sound card, some of those you have to check. You may have to check the settings to ensure that you're on line out. I think, let me get Jerry real quick, and I'll be right with you.
I was just going to ask what kind of external, like a turtle or one of those long. I use a, what do you call them? The stringer.
The MP3 streamers. I've got one up here. That's what I use.
I actually liked my MP3 streamer so much that I took my MA150 apart and permanently mounted it inside, so that I didn't have to worry about where it was. It was always in the amp. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, anyway, that's those types of things help.
SquareView won't open unless you have that plugged in first. Is there no adapter you can fix for that? On SquareView there is?
There's an option for your output.
Bob Pointer, Florida. Most of the time, if you're using an external sound card, you want to make sure you have everything plugged in before you turn that computer on.
That's a real good rule of thumb. If you use SquareView, SquareView's a little bit tweaky about. SquareView's a little tweaky about the idea of you changing sound cards while it's open. So if you load SquareView and you didn't have whatever your device was, sometimes on some laptops, even the plug-in to the headphone jack, you have to start over or go in like Barry was saying and change the input setting. I think we had a comment over here.
My name is Shinichi Mochizuki from Japan. I have a last question. I know that full yak speaker all the time, new type, different output power. Different. I know that. In that case, can we repair or can we change our old type to new type? Can we change?
At one time, they were offering kits that you could buy where you could take an old yak and upgrade it to I call it the mid yak because there was another time where they changed again one time. But you could update your old yak stack to the newer style yak stack. I don't know if Paul Cody has those available for sure. He did get all of Tom's stuff. So he may have some of those, but you would need to visit with Paul Cody. Oh, parts. The question was, could he buy parts? And I believe that there are some parts available. Someone else have a question or comment?
Yeah, he's here in the vendor room. You need to go talk to him. Right.
I don't like to speak for a vendor. If they have something in stock or not, you need to visit with them.
Yeah.
New topic. I know some callers that have started to go to Bose speakers. Any experience with Bose?
Personally, yes. I have mixed feelings about those. If you want to get the least expensive Bose model that they have, I believe they call it an L1. It's a nice little compact unit. It sounds pretty good for smaller venues. If you crank it up much, I don't think that it does quite as good, personally. The other problem that I have with it is the microphone channel in that amplifier is way too bassy for what we do. I'm too bassy right now. You know, you got to have more control, and you don't have it. So then if you take your MA150 and use it as a mixer to the Bose, the small Bose unit, it works great. But now you've got $1,000 in an L1, and you got an MA150 or 220 or whatever that you're using as a mixer. So I don't know if you're helping yourself much. If you go up a notch or two in the Bose, $2,000, $3,000 ranges as they have, you have the ability to adjust all that. Next question or comment. Let me get him real quick.
The other problem, Virgil Forbes from Maryland. I looked into Bose and Peavy's several years ago, and some of them sound really good. I hesitated because think about the life of square dance equipment. In and out of the trunk of the car, especially if you don't take it in and out every time, sitting in the trunk of the car, freezing or boiling. Got to tell you, the yak stacks may not be great musically, but they are very rugged equipment. And when I looked at the Bose and the Peavies, I just did not have the feeling that it would take the abuse that the yaks have taken over the years.
Yeah, that's a great point, because they did design those just as well as the Hiltons were designed, to be pretty rugged, to do what we do. And while we're on that subject, the Hilton amplifiers, and I'm not trying to sell Hilton at all, that's not my point, but when Hilton first designed that amplifier for the microphone channel, he intentionally created that channel to be better for what we do. We're not singing karaoke in a country western bar. We need to be clearer. And some of those other amps that are designed for singers, that's not the way they're set up. They put a little thing in it. He was a caller.
Isn't that why we always tell newer callers getting their equipment set up to not just run down a Radio Shack and buy any old microphone and stuff, because it has to match for what we're doing to project the halls in a clear voice and not, disco boom boom or whatever.
Did I miss someone that had a comment or question? Bo?
Bo Byerly, North Carolina. Just to touch back briefly on the external sound cards, whatever operating system that you have on your laptop, you want to make sure the sleep function will not affect that external sound card. It does happen. The easiest thing to do is to go into your control panel and just tell it, don't sleep, don't sleep.
It's good that you mentioned that, because that is a problem. I wrote a script for the launching of my Square View that actually locks out sleep mode, puts the screen on full brightness, and turns the volume to the setting that I want, and does all that. And as soon as I close Square View, it sets all the settings back to default. I'm a tech geek.
Does anyone use a Hilton 300?
Good question.
Never mind. Okay. I was going to say there was a neat thing that you could do if you had a hall that really had bad echo. If you had a full yak, you could actually plug in music on, you could use either top or bottom and put your voice on the other.
Absolutely.
And then you could balance that out. But if you don't have a 300, never mind.
Or a 500 would do it.
Yeah, or a 500, yes.
Anything where you had a main and a monitor channel could do that. Jack Blatties, let me grab him and I'll get you on the way back. I'm getting my exercises.
There you are. You're getting your steps in. You got your Fitbit on. Anyway, so getting back to the streamer thing, I don't know anybody. I was even looking on Facebook for one a couple months ago. My computer says I do have one streamer, and when I try to plug it in, it says needs software. So I go out to the Google website and try to find software, and I can't find software for it. Does anybody have software for those MP3 streamers?
I can actually tell you how to fix that. For driver, absolutely. What they did is when they went to Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, they left out USB 2 drivers for the Intel chip. And whenever you plug that in, it goes, I see it, but I don't know what it is. If you go find yourself a different Intel driver for your USB connection, it'll find it. I can help you with that. Question, comment? I think somebody else. Bo, let me get Bo first.
Bo Byerly, North Carolina. I was curious if anyone sets up for federation dances where you're going to have lots of different callers. Do you ever set up a monitor speaker so they can hear themselves better?
Well, that's a great question. Anybody want to comment to that? Matt?
Usually I don't set up a monitor speaker because usually the way I set up the speakers, the caller will be able to hear himself or herself. And having it just back behind the caller, that way they can hear themselves. Definitely you need if you're going to do something like the Ghost Riders last year, they had a different sound system that they were using, so they had a monitor speaker so that you could hear yourself, because you have to hear yourself, so you'll be on pitch, or you want to make sure that you're right with the music, not ahead or behind, and yeah, you definitely need that.
He's exactly right. In those big venues where they've got huge speakers, concert speaker sound, not what we're used to, they'll usually put somebody in charge of operating the knobs to get it to sound right to the floor. Well, if they don't give you some kind of monitor system that you have some control over to get it to sound the way you need it to sound, you could be in trouble.
Terry Headley, Martinsburg, West Virginia. Again, another wireless headset question. It sounds tinty. When I'm using a regular mic that I plug in, it's fine. When I use a wireless set and I'm trying to do a singing call, it sounds tinty. So do I need to adjust? I know it's a dumb question, but do I adjust the bass, the treble, up, down? What's the best?
I would play with your tone controls.
And I do, but I still can't seem to get it. So do I need more bass or less treble? What? Or a different headset. I paid $400 for this headset. So what? I'll just keep playing with
your tone controls.
That's the easiest answer, is to just continue. When you're not at the dance or before the dance, experiment with that. Sometimes adding bass fixes one problem but creates a new one. And the same thing with the treble. You're going to have to kind of play with the balance until you find that happy spot. And perhaps you're softer in your patter and a little more driving with your vocal in the singing call. You may have to reposition the mic a little bit because maybe you're punching harder. I think she was next.
From DC, I find I put a lot more bass on my remote mic, and then when I go back to my wired mic, when I'm standing up at the table, I have to turn that back. Anyway, I also wondered, I think you might have just covered this in a point, about not necessarily taking the house sound. If you're somewhere and they offer, speakers coming out of the ceiling somewhere, you want to always say you can bring your own thing, all you need is a table and some electricity, right? Don't ever take the house sound, right?
Yeah, definitely, because things can happen.
Too many variables.
Yeah.
You had a comment still?
Lauren Smith from Calgary, Canada. I do have there's been a lot of talk about a lot of different things here, and there's some areas that you haven't brought up yet, and I'm just wondering if it might be a good idea to bring it up. Speaker length, or speaker wire length, the gauge that you have in your wires. I know some people make their own speaker cables. What type of gauge do you recommend? Shielded versus unshielded? Yeah, there's a variety of things that hasn't been brought up yet. Maybe that might be a good idea.
Well, I could spend a whole week on that topic. I'm a firm believer of shielding everything that goes into the computer and not shielding anything coming out. Most shielded cables are very, very, very small conductors, and they're not designed to carry the current that the speaker needs to be able to do its work. If you bought a cable and it was shielded and it worked for you, that's great. They'll work, they just won't last. They'll break down. They should say on the package if they're shielded. Now, with that said, back to his original question, the length of the cable does have an impact. The longer the cable is, the more resistance it has. If you're going to run really, really long cables, you have to run bigger conductors to compensate for the amount of length that you're running. And there's a mathematical formula for that as well that I could share with somebody if they wanted to, but that's not really the scope of that. But 12 gauge really works well unshielded. You could probably run 25 feet with that, real easy. if you're running speakers that are split, this is going to sound really strange, but if I had a speaker over here that was 25 feet that way and 25 feet that way, I love to call those big halls like that. But if I did that, if I put a 25-foot cord on this one and a 50-foot cord on that one, you're going to run into some oddities. A millisecond difference in phase. It makes really strange things. Try to keep the same size cable, same length. Anyone else? I think we're just about done with time.
Just a quick one. Have you ever run into a problem where the venue you're at is unionized and they won't let you set up your own sound and they make you take the house sound? What about that? You just do?
Yeah, there's nothing you can do. Yeah, there's some areas that are union as far as music and that sort of stuff, and they have to have a stage manager to set that up and be there present anytime you're performing, and you just have to follow whatever rules those are. Matt, you got any comments?
We had a situation with Baltimore 2000 where they were supposed to help us set up equipment. They would work 15 minutes and they would break for 15 minutes, and we lost a whole day of setup time. So we set up when they weren't around. I didn't say that out loud.
Blank that part of tape. Notice.
Yes. Yeah, but you do kind of have to follow you're kind of at their mercy.
Sometimes you're just I'd like to thank you all for your good questions and your good comments. Nice hand for Matt.
Nice hand for Scott.
Appreciate Matt. You guys are awesome.